Hello and welcome. This is Tara Van Zant Stern with SSD Global Solutions, Smart, Simple Decision Making. We specialize in a product known as Leaner Six Sigma. We are also sponsors of the Rocky Mountain Quality Consortium. We are partnering with ASQ Denver. We are happy today to have Brian Galli to be speaking with us on the topic of integrating Lean Six Sigma into the PMBOK, the project management. Welcome, Brian.
Welcome. Thank you for having me.
We're glad to have you here. Brian is the Assistant Professor of Computer Science and Management Engineering for Long Island University. He's got 5 years of experience teaching and performing research in undergraduate and graduate programs in the field of all of these things: engineering, industrial, and management engineering. He has done a lot of research in the field of Lean Six Sigma, project management, and healthcare. Brian and I worked together when I was the chair of the Lean Enterprises Division for the American Society for Quality. So I'm very excited. I'm going to hand the platform over to Brian and let him start his speech.
Great. Thank you, Tara, for the invitation and the opportunity to speak with everyone today about the topic that, I hold near and dear, the idea of integrating the best practices of Lean and Six Sigma into PMBOK, the project management body of knowledge for the project management, that is based from the Project Management Institute. That is, as Tara mentioned, is one of my primary areas of research is the integration of both continuous improvement or Lean and Six Sigma and project management. So, the idea that we're going to talk about today is, we'll go through some of the session objectives. We'll talk about in general, what Six Sigma and what Lean are principles. We'll also talk about, currently what the project management body of knowledge consists of. Because it is, for those who might not be familiar, they actually are in the process of revamping and coming out with the sixth edition shortly, which will, take some and add some new bells and whistles. We'll talk about the goals of both concepts and how Lean and PMBOK and Lean Six Sigma can be integrated. I'll talk about a proposed framework that I've been looking at and working on for the last, couple of years, and then we'll wrap up with any potential questions and discussion. So, in general, we know that project management body of knowledge has several knowledge areas and several processes that really any project manager, any project teams need to account for either formally or informally in order to effectively plan and, just as importantly, execute a project. More often than not, project managers are under pressure to do things cost effectively in a time constrained environment, but also trying to account for all the different knowledge areas and processes associated with the project management body of knowledge, that holy Bible of project management from the Project Management Institute. I feel and I've found that Lean Six Sigma tools can be used to not only navigate these various knowledge areas and processes, but integrating those kind of give you the best of both worlds. Because there's things that are done in Lean and Six Sigma that are not done vice versa in project management. And then on the other side, there's things that Lean and Six Sigma can use from the project management world. So we're going to talk about the how Lean Six Sigma relates to the project management body of knowledge and the life cycle. We're talking about what tools and concepts I feel it can be utilized throughout, and how to effectively integrate these two, and then how this can actually lead to a streamlined project management life cycle. So just a little background, and again, this some of this might be a little bit repetitive from the lean world for those who might have already been familiar with it, but the idea of Lean Six Sigma is combining the best of Lean and Six Sigma to relentless pursuit of perfection through waste elimination and elimination of variation, the enemy of Six Sigma. So a lean system emphasizes the prevention of waste across the entire system and not just a process. So an organization that is a lean enterprise is equivalent to a company that has a culture and its operations and its infrastructure where the employees consistently look to improve not only their skills but the production processes. The mantra, as I believe it, the Toyota production system and the lean mantra is typically better, faster, cheaper. I talk about correct or standard better, faster, cheaper. Let's get everyone on the same page to do it correctly, even though it might not be the effective way or the efficient way. Then we can do better, faster, cheaper. Lean again focuses on respect for people and the idea of Kaizen, the incremental improvement. And Lean Six Sigma typically follows that structured, DMAIC, define, measure, analyze, improve, control approach. The key principles of Lean, as we know, are specifying value from the customer's perspective, what they're willing to pay for, identify the value from the customer, try to create continuous flow, strive for creating a pull environment versus a traditional push environment, and again the spirit of continuous improvement, relentless pursuit of perfection. So, what is PMBOK? As it currently states in the Project Management Body of Knowledge from PMI, in its fifth edition, it's a set of guide. I like to approach it when I train people and I give lectures or speeches. It's a set of guidelines. Really, it's an approach that helps project managers, almost like a checklist in a way, ensure that they're planning the project most effectively, which then leads into execution. So, as we might know, a project is, by definition, temporary undertaking to create a unique product, service, result, and that is a fair definition from the project management body of knowledge and a project management institute. So, project management itself is the application of knowledge, skills, tools, and techniques to execute a project to meet specific requirements. So, the project management in its fifth edition currently has 5 process groups, really, which is the life cycle of any, for the most part, any project: initiating, planning, executing, monitoring, controlling, and closure. 10 knowledge areas: the integration, scope, time, cost, quality, human resource, communication, risk, procurement, and stakeholder. And those 10 knowledge areas and 5 process groups make up 47 processes, or 47 essentially areas, things that the project manager needs to think about as they start planning and executing a project. So, what are the goals of both concepts? Lean Six Sigma focuses on change, behaviors, and improvement. Okay, improving quality, reducing cost, eliminating waste, and reducing lead time. Project management focuses on using tools and methods to complete a project on time, on budget, meeting scoped requirements. So the idea is that if you think about it, Lean and Six Sigma essentially perform projects. That's what they're doing. Lean and Six Sigma perform projects on, what I like to say, unknown problems and unknown solutions. When they get to the point where when they have the root causes and they have solutions identified or alternatives identified, that's when really project management comes in. You know, in my experience, Lean and Six Sigma, what it does very well is defining, measure, analyzing, and coming up with improvements. It doesn't do as well when it comes to actually implementing those improvements and optimizing them. That's really where there's a shortfall, in my opinion, of Six Sigma and Lean. And then on the other side, that's where project management, I think, can fill the void. And on the other side, when it comes to the control of a project, Lean and Six Sigma have that down to a science very well, but then it doesn't do as well with closure. And that, in my opinion, also leads into that fifth process group from the PMBOK, the life cycle that can be utilized to help ensure that a project, essentially, as we know, is temporary, that it eventually does come to an end. So the proposed model, that how I see that they can be integrated, is bringing the idea best of both worlds together, per se, and creating what's known as the define, measure, analyze, improve, implement, control, and closure. Okay, so taking the traditional DMAIC approach, overlaying some of the project management process groups. Okay, and what I like to call this, per se, and I haven't come up with a fancy title for this, is Lean Six Sigma project management. Okay, where what we're doing is really, wherever you see an X in this table here, represents essentially an overlap between Lean and Six Sigma with project management, the project management life cycle as per PMBOK. So it really adds the implement and the closing pieces to a suggested life cycle of a Lean Six Sigma project. Because again, going back to my initial point, one of the things I find is that a lot of projects, Lean Six Sigma projects, don't do as well implementing and closing, implementing solutions, and then later on in the life cycle closing these projects. And that leads into things like the never ending project. So in this, this proposed integration, the define phase is where, I find that both PMBOK and Lean Six Sigma stress the importance of defining, the project right. But what the difference um, is the fact that PMBOK stresses much more detailed planning, whereas Lean Six Sigma pushes higher level planning with the charter, but not so much focused on in the details just yet. That's where measure comes in a little bit more. And you can see this if you ever, you can see that this is evident if you ever take a look at a charter, a project charter from a typical project versus a Lean Six Sigma project. In a lot of my experience, Lean Six Sigma project charters are typically 1 to 2 pages. But in a lot of project charters that are done for, implementing a new IT system or implementing, a new software, whatever it might be, those charters are usually much more detailed. And both of these overlap because they emphasize the identification and engagement of project stakeholders at the very beginning of a project. At a minimum, what I find and what I would recommend is that these tasks, in a Lean Six Sigma project management environment or life cycle, you should be looking to do a SIPOC process map for the process or project you're studying, defining specifically what is and what, more importantly, in many cases, what is not in scope, the delineation of the relevant key performance indicators and their associated to be values, your baseline, your goal, and your entitlement, the listing of stakeholders and their level of influence and their interest in the project, the breakdown of who the lead and project sponsors are, and a timeline. But again, a timeline in a Six Sigma world usually is much higher level than a specific details in the months or the detailed project plan that you would see in a typical project from the project management world. The measure phase is, again, when you look at it from a project management perspective, this is, again, if you go back to that overlap, the measure phase typically is when you see a lot of the planning and beginning of execution. And in the measure phase, um, the team needs to not only plan, develop, and implement the appropriate data collection, but they also need to start thinking about how does this actually go into the execution of the project. And that's why in that matrix that I showed you, the where you overlap PMBOK and Lean Six Sigma, that there's measure would go into both planning and execution phases of PMBOK. And you need to plan your KPIs and the data and how it's going to be collected. And actually, in many cases, depending on the project needs, this measure phase could be a mini project or a project in its own right, because it could, I'm working on 3 projects right now, for example, with the manufacturer here in New York, where they don't have measurement systems in place. So we have to we're extending their measure phase in order to ensure that we have data collection and measurement systems in place, that they're valid and etc. That the point I'm making is that in order for us to sufficiently and effectively execute our project, we need to collect a whole, and take a lot more detailed planning around our measure phase. There's other organizations and other teams I've worked with where they have well established and validated measurement systems, and their measure phase is quick down and dirty because they already have that data collection essentially established and validated. In the analyze phase, this is where, again, we not, as we know, we collect the data and we analyze the data that we collected during measure. This is typically the most critical aspect of this phase, is to ensure the teams focus on the root cause and not the symptoms. PMBOK usually moves past the idea or dream solutions and incorporates practical solutions. This is where, again, I find a disparity between Lean Six Sigma and PMBOK, is that Lean Six Sigma some teams get stuck in analysis paralysis, but there's a lot of tools from PMBOK that we can use to essentially move past dream solutions into practical application. In the improve phase, this is when we actually formulate alternative solutions, and we focus on a lot of, you know, finding these alternative solutions, eliminating the root causes, and starting to test them out. One thing that I find that is critical here, that is very critical for Lean Six Sigma, but it is stressed a lot in project management, is communication. The communication knowledge area is one of those 10 knowledge areas is really critical to success of this phase because this is an area that can make or break a project because you need to ensure that you're coming up with data-driven solutions that are, again, based on the root causes. The implement phase or phase of my proposed structure or the proposed structure is the area that really requires project management. This itself, again, depending on the complexity, it can be, again, its own project in its own right, requiring the development of things such as work breakdown structure, design implementing systems and infrastructure, training, procedures, approvals to complete rollout with minimal adverse impact. This is, again, where we focus a lot about the risk management and the risk planning, and this requires a lot more detail than in Six Sigma, where we would just come up with solutions and implement, but it's not as easily as flipping a switch. And a lot of people, a lot of organizations, as I'm finding, fail to realize that. And that's more often than not why one of the key reasons why they what I call repeat history, where they do an initiative, they do they do project A, and they come up with improvements, and they don't implement things correctly, and then they have to repeat the project again or redo it essentially a year later, a period later, whereas if they just implemented things effectively and used project management, they can actually help account for this. Control phase, typically unique to Lean Six Sigma, but very still important to project management because, as we know, monitoring and controlling is a key aspect of ensuring that we're going through execution phase appropriately. The challenge here is to determine not only what KPIs to track, but also to put the necessary data collection in place without the undue burden to the frontline stakeholders. Lean Six Sigma, I found, does not account well for a transition from a project to an operation, and which is where project management brings in that closing phase. The closing phase is, again, unique to PMBOK. And I think that this is a critical area that, again, Lean Six Sigma does not do as well. And that's one of the reasons for, if you think about when Motorola and GE developed, over, several years ago, decades ago at this point, developed Six Sigma, originally it only had measure, analyze, improve, control. They on the front end, they identified the issue of not having, clearly defined projects, and they added the define phase. I think retrospectively, this is something that we have to consider adding as an end phase to ensure that we have all of our ducks in a row, that we did efficiently, that we effectively planned and executed everything to ensure that it helps to ensure sustainability of the project for the long term. So, what are some of the key principles of Lean Six Sigma project management as I approached it? These six key principles, as I talk about, are eliminating waste, empowerment, and this is the people piece, the empowerment, respect, and integrity, decide later in order to deliver fast, amplify learning, see the whole, and risk management. So when I talk about eliminating waste, this talks about one of the key principles of lean, using things such as the types of waste, or again, looking at from the current, moving away from the current thinking that waste is not defined, but moving more towards the required thinking of looking to define it in terms of a value stream to improve things with handoffs, dependencies, etc., and not necessarily deadlines, and try to create pull in that environment. So when we talk about that, especially on the analyze piece, we have to get rid of, we have to not get rid of, we have to move through effectively the analyze phase in order to minimize the analysis paralysis. I've seen several teams get stuck in the analysis paralysis, the analyze phase, and they never get out of analyze because they spend so much time in too much detail or in the weeds that they're not effectively able to identify their root causes and move forward. The empowerment, respect, and integrity, again, a key principle of Lean and Six Sigma. And I think it's becoming more and more prevalent in project management as well. Not only knowing your customer, what is valued to them, but knowing your stakeholders and knowing value according to them and how to measure it for both, and defining those roles and responsibility again early in the project planning in in both the define and the measure phase, but doing that continuously. Doing team building, again, that I see is very important in both Lean and Six Sigma and project management, to do team building to move through the team dynamics of forming, storming, norming, performing, and even adjourning, again, that fifth stage or that fifth unsung stage, so that way we're all moving in the same direction. It also focuses on managing the things, but leading the people. acknowledging the fact that we do have team dynamics and building on them. If we ignore them, as I tell my teams now, if you ignore the team dynamics, you're setting yourselves up for failure. Empowering the teams and creating, self-directed work teams and having them take ownership, involving frontline staff at the beginning of the project and having them get involved in the work. This is that idea of the last planner principle, plan in great detail as you get closer to the actual work. That's something that is not done effectively in Lean and Six Sigma, but in project management, they stress the idea of, rolling wave project management, that we define the work and we get it in greater detail as we get closer to it. The idea of deciding later and delivering fast. Make continuous improvement possible by looking at the low-hanging fruit, those quick wins. Balance out project complexity and map out a series of interconnected projects. More often than not, a lot of Lean Six Sigma teams I find will try to boil the ocean, and they either have their scope too broad, or in some cases they have too narrow scopes, and it makes it really, unachievable in either side of the spectrum. So by defining these small achievable projects that are interconnected, it gives us the ability to handle project scheduling more effectively and efficiently. So we want to manage the work and the number of projects in the pipeline. I rather get 100% of one project done versus 10% of 10 projects done, okay, in that same time period. So that idea, what I'm talking about is, if we look at it from this image on the bottom left, if we have these 7 projects going on at the same time, I rather structure them such that I know I can use my resources and my labor, my equipment, whatever that might be, my budget more effectively and my time more effectively, especially if I have resources, people that are straddling multiple environments or multiple project teams, using them to, complete one project after another, or the key one sequentially or simultaneously. Again, it's not a magic formula or a magic bullet, but looking to do small impacts, less total disasters, and less team failure leads into more effective project success in the long term. So by deciding later to deliver fast, there's in some cases when we want to focus on flexibility. So we might in some cases want to defer decisions, and that's a good way of having by phase gate definitions and specific criteria. Focus on delivering as fast as possible, but with good quality. Think about it again as a relay race. Okay, building from the outcome of, just like a process, that the output from step one becomes the input for step two. That's the same mentality of a project environment, where the output or the performance of project one can become the input for and the planning for project two. And that's part of the essence of the Plan, Do, Study, Act from Deming and Schuhart. Focusing on the eliminating of needing of waiting for rework or waiting, rework, defects, inventory. This allows us to account for dynamic change and starting to think a little bit more on that flexible or agile mentality. So, as I mentioned, in that baseline case, we complete the definition before even development begins. But in some cases, if we look and have a phased definition where we define and develop begin immediately, but allows us to define and develop as we roll along and as we get closer to the actual work, it leads us into the opportunity to have phase definitions. And if one module itself is not critical or not significant, it allows a lot more flexibility. In Lean and Six Sigma world, there's not as much flexibility, or not as we don't see as much flexibility. We tend to see that there's, everything is critical. But in a project management world, putting on my PM hat for a moment, we have to acknowledge that there's going to be some tasks or some activities that are critical and some that are non-critical. Getting that mentality from project management into Lean and Six Sigma will allow you to decide later, defer some decisions, and deliver faster. So at the same time, amplify the learning, train people on the idea of creating a WBS for future phases, okay? Because by doing that, that gives you the ability to plan as you go along. Okay. Also, by educating the team on how change is handled, change management, again, is one of those key aspects that we as society don't do as well. And that's why if you look, a lot of job postings, for example, there's a lot of, job postings and consulting engagements where companies are looking to hire, change management, change agents. Okay, and actually, one of my students just recently accepted, applied to a master's degree program where he's going to be working towards a master's degree in change management. That is, again, a way of how we are changing our way of thinking. It used to be, you get a degree in operations management or project management or supply chain management. This is one of the first programs that I've seen where people can get a degree in change management. So teaching people how to effectively manage and get people through change. The idea of learning from success and learning from failures, integrate that into your project plan as soon as you can, because the sooner you up, just like the sooner you update your project plan and your approach, the better it is for your project life cycle and your project managing your budget and your resources. The idea of creating that productive idea generation environment allows us to start syncing activities amongst team members, bringing in one of the lean concepts of visual management to show performance, issues, status of activities. Okay, using scorecards, using visuals in relation to red, yellow, green and status meetings. Use these tools to share the information. And by seeking to rapidly explore alternatives, you can essentially establish a change control process that allows you to gradually narrow the alternatives to as new as possible based on requirements for testing to allow you to reach optimal solutions to, again, decide later to deliver faster. So I also talk about the idea of seeing a whole. I mentioned the idea of breaking down these projects either into mini projects or being able to take these projects and fit them into the bigger picture of the organization. So by seeing how the entire life cycle itself changes constantly, by being able to focus on scoping and project chartering, we get everyone aligned to the bigger picture. And by making it accessible and visible or visual, excuse me, it makes it easier to understand and easier to see how one thing might impact something upstream or downstream. So by moving through the life cycle in a recursive or iterative manner, it looks for, again, the idea of eliminating non-value added tasks. So by understanding how this project fits into the larger portfolio of the organization, we can not only quantify the project impact, we can also understand selection criteria, benefits, risk, and how this fits into the strategic plan or the mission vision of the organization. And it gives into the ability of bringing in more value to the project as a whole. So this gets into understanding the project delivery system. Know, for example, if you have a PMO, project management office, this helps understand the people, processes, the relationships that these people and processes have, the culture of the environment, the culture of the organization, the culture of the project, and how all of that relates to how you deliver product and services. That's one of the reasons, for example, one of the key questions I ask senior leadership that when I work with them and when I start any initiative, I always ask them, and I'm always encouraged, I'm always eager to hear the answer. I always ask them the question, why are you guys in business? Why do you guys exist? And I get answers about delivering value to customers or improving patient care. Some people are honest and say, oh, it's about making money. But and from those answers, I work with them to understand how that drives their mission, their strategy, and then all the way how they deliver these projects. One area that I add as a principle is risk management. And the reason I say this is that where Lean and Six Sigma have the risk management is for example, areas such as you know cause and effect diagrams, failure modes effects analyses, or FMEAs. While those are good, I find that those are very unsung or underutilized tools. Those are really good tools to use, especially the FMEA. Even though it is a tedious task or tedious tool to use, I find that is one tool that is very effective, that enables teams to be proactive versus reactive. Project management stresses the need, PMBOK stresses the need for both qualitative and quantitative methods for managing risk. But I find more often than not, a lot of teams, only use qualitative tools, such as assessing severity and likelihood of occurrence. But that is not enough, because that, again, they steer away from the quantitative methods because they are quantitative. They're harder to do at times. They take more time. But teams, in any case, that we want to use tools that enable us to be more proactive and reactive. So when we go back to the amplify learning, we're seeing the whole. When we do identify issues or risks or lessons, that we incorporate them and we adjust, we reassess our project risk throughout the life cycle. This enables us to optimize and in some cases re-optimize solutions as we go along. We also want to build in that mentality of small scale testing of solutions prior to deployment. This is something that, again, Lean Six Sigma does very well in terms of, or teams should try when they're in the improve phase about doing design of experiments and optimizing those solutions. And then from there, growing it out. And that's something that you can learn from, that we can learn from Lean and Six Sigma and bring that into project management, because project management is, again, for, known solutions and known problems. Integrating the risk management findings to the proper PM areas and lean tools gives us the ability to essentially build quality into the project versus inspecting in quality into the project. Okay, enables us to do more monitoring and more quality improvement versus quality assurance and quality control. So overall, again, the principles, the approach that I recommend, the integration of the tools and the life cycle, the overlap, both Lean and Six Sigma and project management have their specific purposes and applications. Okay, they both have strengths and weaknesses, as I think that I pointed out clearly, that they complement each other very well. Lean and Six Sigma focus on unknown problems or unknown root causes of problems, unknown solutions at the time. Project management focuses on the idea of known solutions, known problems or root causes, known solutions. Both of those, while different focus or different foci, they can complement each other. That's why when you and again, this is my approach, my proposed structure would be a define, measure, analyze, improve, implement, control, closure structure that brings essentially the best of both worlds. It's my approach to, it's just one way to look at how they can be integrated to maximize the benefits of both approaches. I've talked about the idea that the project management body of knowledge has those 47 processes across the knowledge areas and process groups. This can be used as a checklist to help improve not only developing and managing a project that is using Lean and Six Sigma and project management principles. The life cycle here that I also introduced focused in on six key principles that I think apply to both Lean Six Sigma and and project management. While they're high level, I think it enables the user or the listener to understand the main drivers and the needs for both methodologies. And my next steps, what I would propose is what I'm looking to do in the near future is to essentially examine and start using this approach instead of having a team follow define, measure, analyze, improve, control, have them actually use the proposed define, measure, analyze, improve, implement, control, closure with defining those specific, that model and then refining the specific tools and concepts used in each phase of the proposed model and taking those and refining the model and then building some validity into this. Again, because a lot of research shows that both areas are needed. And in my opinion, the Lean and Six Sigma are not going anywhere. Project management is not going anywhere. If anything, the need for them are significantly increasing. Okay. And you can see this in the job market every day. If you look on, any, job postings or career sites, the needs for people that have Lean and Six Sigma or project management background is ever increasing. And I think, having um, both of these, you know, enables you to be even more marketable as well as more value to your organization or to the clients that you might work with if you're on the consulting side. So I'd like to thank everyone for their time and their attention during my presentation, and I'll entertain any questions that you may have at this point.
Brian, that was absolutely excellent. I think the question I have is what got you interested in Lean Six Sigma and project management? I mean, what was the genesis of that?
My major genesis, I would say, happens to be when I really got into the healthcare world. I found that a lot of teams were doing Lean and Six Sigma, but they were repeating history so often, where, and I see it still to this day when I do when I'm doing some projects in healthcare organizations, and it's not just healthcare, but I found that organizations, they'll do, a project that took, a Lean Six Sigma project, um, for, January to June. And then all of a sudden next fall they're doing the same project that they just did last winter, last spring. And then the same people are on the team and the same sponsorship, the same leadership. They ask the same question. Didn't we just do this project? And I find, it's Einstein's definition of insanity. Organizations doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result, is insane. And there's a lot of reasons why it. Yeah, and this is one. What I find one reason is that they don't have the needed structure, or the appropriate structure. And there's other reasons. Poor scoping, poor communication, poor metrics, and there's a whole wide variety of different reasons. And that's another area of research that I've gotten really into, or I'm getting more into. But my genesis really came about that I sit there, or I'm trying to mentor these projects, and I myself am saying, we need some project management tools here. We need to integrate, we need to use a project plan. We need a work breakdown structure. Oh, well, how do we make these improvements come to light? It's not just enough about, in healthcare, for example, if you come up with a new checklist or a new process, that process, you can't just make a new checklist and implement it tomorrow. That new checklist has to go through several different committees for approval. It has to go through Joint Commission, like the ISO of healthcare, to make sure that it complies with HIPAA and confidentiality, etc. Especially if it's going to be part of the medical record. Then people have to actually be trained on it. Then it has to be phased in. So there's a lot of little one-offs, these little tasks that have to be done. It's not simple. It's not enough just to say, oh, we're going to do a checklist. And I find a lot of teams come up with that checklist. They're great with it, but then it doesn't go anywhere. And
Yeah.
by giving them some of these tools, I found that they effectively implement. They're more effectively implementing and increasing their likelihood of sustaining projects. And then I also find, on the other hand, the closing piece is another area where teams fall short because I've done over 700 projects at this point in 10 plus years. Um, a lot, I don't own any of those projects anymore. The idea of those projects are they eventually should come to an end. And and that's by definition what a project is it's temporary. So eventually projects, if you're going from a current state to a future state, the project needs to transition from a project to an operation, which is ongoing, repetitive. And a lot of organizations don't turn a project to a routine operation effectively. And what that ends up happening is, they are good for doing it for a month or two until the quality police, or the quality team, it disappears, and all of a sudden it slides back to the way it was. And then again, it leads into the idea of doing that same project over again, and then saying, "Didn't we just do this?" And then why wasn't it effectively sustained? And then it's for different reasons. But I find, again, they don't effectively close the project, and that's a big
Ah.
fallacy that I'm trying to get a lot of my teams currently to overcome.
Well, Brian, I have one final question,
Mhm.
and I may be putting you on the spot because I didn't prepare you for this question. But one of the final questions on this presentation that I have is if you're a project manager and you're interested in using Lean and Six Sigma, do you have a favorite tool that you like to use or advice that you'd like to give of self-study that someone could do that might make projects better, faster, and more cost effective?
My first recommendation to every project and every process that I, look to do is always start with a process map. I personally,
Ah,
I always
good
like to,
idea.
I always like to, whether it's a SIPOC, a supplier input process output customer, or a high level flow chart or top down, whatever, pick your poison because there's a wide variety of different high level flow charts. But I always like to, when I get teams together, I always like to ensure that everybody is on the same page of the process that we're looking to investigate. So even before the project starts, I like to work with the sponsors or some of the key stakeholders to define that high level process map. And then I'll work with the team to validate that. And then everything else that I'm doing in the define phase into the, into the measure all the way through, control or closure is based on that agreed upon flow chart. And that leads into a much more, I typically in my measure phases, I like to use value stream maps where we take that high level process map and flow it out even further. But my advice is, use a process map to begin with, and I would emphasize make sure that you spend enough time in the define phase to ensure that you properly define your project and your metrics and your scope and everything before you get into measure and you further get down the line. Every other step, every other phase that you go into, whether you're following traditional DMAIC or the proposed structure that I mentioned in this presentation, it all, again, this is the reason why Motorola and GE decades ago realized the fallacy of starting in measure. Everything that you do from measure all the way to the end of the project is based on how well and how effectively you define your project at the beginning.
Perfect, Brian. This is Dr. Tara Van Zant Stern with SSD Global Solutions. My guest today was Brian Galli. For more information about Brian, you can go to Rocky Mountain Quality Consortium at www.rmqc.org. Thank you for attending.